Good morning. So we're supposed to learn Parsha now. So good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Parshas Vayeira, and you can find it on page 78. So if you have your Solar edition, you can find it on page 78. So what is the Parsha about? That's what we're going to try to discuss, to achieve, and to figure out over the next few minutes. So first of all, Avraham Avinu is recovering from a brief... Good morning. Okay, now we're ready. Thank you so much. We'll come back. Avraham Avinu is recovering from a Brit Milah. And Avram and Sarah have just experienced their... we could call entry into Jewish practice, entry into Jewish existence with a new name, and with a mitzvah, a significant mitzvah, Brit Milah. And even though they become, quote-unquote, more Jewish than before, they're very welcoming. They're still welcoming. And they interact, and I use the word still, they interact with society. There are times that people experience some kind of a spiritual awakening, and due to the fact that they view the world as temporary, interacting with others in the world becomes something that is difficult for them because they're in a different realm. The head is somewhere else. They want to just meditate, pray, study Torah. Avram Avinu teaches us that after you have reached a spiritual greatness, you are actually fulfilling your mission by interacting with people and welcoming people and inspiring others, which is far more challenging. It is much easier to be a spiritual person by detaching. When you interact, it is more of a challenge, but that's what Avraham Avinu inspires us, to be concerned about the welfare of others and to use the needs of others as an opportunity for you to, number one, assist them, but after that, when they are appreciative, not to take the gratitude for your own benefit, but rather to turn to them and tell them, you know what, now that you are grateful, let me tell you who you are supposed to be grateful to the Almighty. And that's really a sign of greatness, that when spiritual leaders don't focus on themselves, but rather are here to really serve and connect people to the higher being. So that's Avraham Avinu. And concern for others is the first part of the parasha, and there's obviously the news that there's going to be a child, Yitzchak, and the word tzachak makes its appearance often here, and that's true happiness. When the world when there's continuity for someone like Avraham Avinu, there's happiness, right? Because if the world would end after Avraham and we would not know what existence is about, this would not be a happy place. Avraham Avinu has continuity, that's Yitzchak. The next section of the parasha, we're going to run through it briefly, has to do with Sdom. So if you turn to page 84, you will find the well-known prayer of Avraham for Sdom, which again is quite inspiring, that here you have a person that is preaching tolerance, that's preaching love, that's preaching ethics, that's preaching concern for others. And when there's a society down the road that stands for everything against him, he's still concerned about them. And when he hears that they're going to be destroyed, he prays for their welfare. Another incredible act by Avraham Avinu. And then these angels come to Sdom, and we know the story that the ethics there are awful, and Sdom is destroyed. Right? So if you want to, Sdom is like Sears Canada, right? You know, you've seen pictures online that they show that like everything is like, because people go and they want to find their deal to save the 15%. So you got to pull out shoes, so you have to throw them on the floor. So that's what happens in Sdom. Now, page 90. Sdom is gone. Now, Avraham Avinu, as you remember from last week, his first location in the land of Israel is more to the north, Shechem. He leaves that region and he moves towards the Hebron area. He moves towards Hebron. Hebron is not far from Sdom, and it is very possible that Sdom, being such a significant city, had traffic that would pass through Hebron, and he was positioned in a location where he interacted with many people. That was his interest, to interact with people, to meet people, to welcome them, and to inspire them, and to have an impact. That's what Avram is doing. It could very well be that after the destruction of Sdom, the traffic is declined, and he moves to a new area. So that's what we're going to start off with on page 90. On page 90, and Perek Chaf Vayisa Misham Avraham. So it's like 6 lines from the bottom. Avraham leaves that region, and he enters into Arza HaNegev. He makes his way to the south towards the Negev, and Vayeshev. And where does he eventually settle? Ben Kadesh, a place called Kadesh, Ben Shur, and a place called Shur. That's the general region. But where does he actually live? Vayagar Bigrar. Now, as it occurred earlier in Egypt, he had a concern about his wife, and he has to claim she's a sister. And indeed, she is taken by a new person introduced here, a fellow by the name of Avimelech, the king of Gerar. And he takes Sarah, the Almighty who protects Abraham, in verse 3, appears to Avimelech, and he says to him that you deserve to die for the woman you have taken. She's a married woman. And he claims in verse 5, this is unfair, I was told she was a single woman. She's a sister. So God tells him, listen, return, verse 7, return this the man's wife. He'll pray for you. And then we have a very interesting conversation that occurs where Avimelech turns to Avraham and he rebukes him for not being honest with him. Verse 11, Vayomer Avraham. So Avraham here defends his actions, defends the fact that he was not clearly sharing all facts with Avimelech. Vayomer Avraham, Ki Amarti. It is because I said to myself, Rak en Yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. You know what is lacking here? In other words, you Avimelech claim that this is terrible what you've done. You weren't honest with me. You could have been honest with me, and I would have respected the fact that she's a married woman. Don't compare me to the Egyptians. Egyptians are lacking ethics. There indeed, if you come into the town and you say to yourself and you say to others that this woman is my wife and they have an interest in this woman, they're going to kill you. But me, in my region, I preach ethics here. There are values in my society. And Avraham responds to him, you might have values, but en yirat elokim b'makom hazeh. The issue is that there is no fear of God. And if you don't fear God, you can have all the ethics and values in the world. My concern stands, and I was very well concerned that if I identify her as a wife, they're going to kill me. Now then he goes ahead and he defends the fact that she happens to be a sister. Now, eventually, Avimelech says to him, you know what, you could stay here, and they seem to settle the issue. But it's an interesting interaction because who exactly is this Avimelech? And he later on, and this is really, it appears throughout Tanakh that Avimelech is considered the figurehead or the father of a nation of the Plishtim, the Philistines. the Philistines make their appearance throughout Tanakh. They settle in a region that is on the coast. If you go south of Ashdod, and you go to Ashkelon, and you go to Azah, in that region they found remains of Philistine society. Obviously, you know of Goliath, you know of Goliath, and they are significant players in the Tanakh, and Avimelech makes his appearance here. Now, who are the Pelishtim? Right? Where do they come from? Not so clear in our text. It's interesting that archaeologists actually link them, and again, there are many cities that Tanakh identifies as cities that belong to the Pelishtim. Many archaeologists link them to early Greek society. Early Greek society, when it comes to the pottery that they found, the fact that there's urban organization. And as a result, it's very possible that this was a society that had some ethics, that had some values. They believed in some kind of social structure. They believed in social structure, and therefore they viewed themselves very differently than the Egyptians, and they had a claim on Avraham. You, Avraham, had to lie to us. You know, you claim that there's a lack of fear of. You claim that you cannot share with us the status of this woman you are with because we might kill her. Absolutely not. We have values, right? We know wrong from right. We understand the value of a social structure and justice. And Avraham responds, you know what? You could have that all. But if you lack the fear of God, your society will sink, right? There's a slippery slope. There are no boundaries that are going to be long-lasting if a society does not have an understanding that we have a responsibility to something greater. Okay, so this is an explanation I've presented in the past. Rak en yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. You have to have a fear of God. It's interesting to note that one of the commentators, this Sfornos, this goes back 500 years ago, shares with us that often in Tanakh, when you find the word Elokim, it is not God, but could be authority, or it could be like a judge is called an Elokim. The Elokim Yavod Varshnem. Throughout Tanakh, Elokim could be authority. And what Avraham is saying to Avimelech is the following. In your society, due to the fact that you give rights to people, and in your society that your kings are weaker, meaning in other societies there's a king, he makes a decision, he tells you to go ahead and do something, they'll do it. Among the Philistines, there's a social structure, there's social order, and the rulers are weaker rulers because they have to take into consideration, they already have roots of some kind of democracy, that what people say has to be taken into consideration as well. So if you do not fear authority, you could do what you want. People could do what they want if they don't fear the authority. When there's a king and he'll chop your hands off if you steal, odds are, right, you're not, North Korea, no one's going to steal a sign. Because they know very well that if you steal a sign, that's the death penalty, right? So it's a clean society. It's a wonderful, right? So, we wish we would all. I don't know about that. But on the other hand, when there's a society that people have rights, it could be misused. And this is what Avraham is communicating with him. Like, you might be righteous, but there's a lack of fear of not Elokim, but Elohim, of authority. Rak en yirat, authority in your culture. So again, another explanation that makes this culture we are interacting with into a very unique culture. Now, one of the topics we address often when it comes to Judaism is the question of being rational. Is there such a thing as a rational Judaism? Is there such a thing as a rational religion? In other words, let's analyze what is religion. What is a religious life? So religious life is often identified as that we believe in a God, and he's a God that commands us to do right, and he tells us to avoid the wrong. technically speaking, a person could live a religious life where his own mind and his ability to figure out what is considered right and wrong is completely shut down. You shut it down because all I need to know is to do the right things. So I'll turn to my tradition, I'll turn to my rabbis, I'll turn to the text. If the text says I should go ahead and do it, I'll do it. If the text says I should do it, I won't do it. So therefore comes kashrut, right? I eat kasher. Why do I eat kasher? Well, tradition tells us. I don't punch people. Why do I not punch people? Because I learned in Chumash, right, that you're not supposed to hurt people. I don't kill. So with that approach, I shut down the ability that God gave me to think and determine on my own what is right and what is wrong. Shut it down completely. Because all I need to do is turn into what my tradition teaches us. Fine? That's one way of living a religious life. Now, if you go through our sources, we know that actually there are two types of mitzvot. There are mitzvot that we only perform them because we were commanded to do so. Right? Why do we keep the laws of kashrut? Why do we not eat on Yom Kippur? We were commanded to do it. Fine. But at the same time, there are mitzvot that are identified as sichliot, meaning that with common sense you could come to the same conclusion. And there are differences between them. In general, you do not make a bracha on a mitzvah that you could figure out on your own, because a bracha is a declaration, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu. In other words, I would not be eating a lot of matzah on the 15th of Nisan. Why? Because it's not the most desirable food. But when I sit down, I remember that God commanded me to do it. So I make a declaration that I am doing it because I was commanded to do so. Now, on the other hand, when I go ahead and give tzedakah, I'm not going to make a wait 1 second. I tell the person before I give you the dollar, asher kiddishana b'mitzvotav etzivanu, because I would do it if there's someone that is actually in need. I will give them their lunch money because it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to make a declaration that I am only doing it because God commanded me to do so. Now, so too, Rav Sadia Gaon and Rambam point out that when it comes to mitzvot, that he calls shma'iyot, that we only perform because we heard and experienced the revelation. Such mitzvot, a person should say to himself that, listen, really, I would want to eat. Now, have you ever been to a mall and you see a nice non-kosher restaurant and you walk by and you look at the food and it actually looks appetizing? Now, we've trained ourselves, obviously, that when you see McDonald's you think it's disgusting, and it probably is. But there are times that you see things that are not kosher, right, and they do look good and they do look appetizing. So what do you say to yourself? So comes Rambam and he tells us, you know what you should say? Really, I would love to sit down and have that meal, right? It looks great. But what am I supposed to do? Or in other words, what I do is follow what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me. In the words of the rabbis, you've heard this idea probably, Efshi and Efshi. Any thoughts on this? No. So really I would want, have you ever had that experience of seeing a non-kosher? You have.
Sing Cinnabon. Sing Cinnabon?
Cinnabon, what is this?
The smell of cinnamon.
Okay, I have other things that would perhaps be a little bit. Yeah, that's it. Everyone
Nothing
has
like
their
Sing
thing.
Cinnabon.
But you walk through Bayview Village, right? And you see people waiting in line for these restaurants, right? And you realize that some of them probably do. Why do I not join them? Why do I not eat, right? It won't look good, number one. But besides that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me, don't eat there. So I listened to God. Now, such an approach of saying I am avoiding it because God told me so makes sense if it is a mitzvah that I perform only because of the revelation. On the other hand, if it is a rational mitzvah, says Rambam, a person should not say, really, I would want to kill so-and-so. But what can I do? The Torah prohibits it. Don't say that. Because the desire to kill is a terrible thing. It means you are a corrupt person. You have to work on yourself not to have a desire to kill someone else. Torah side, it is zichli. It is common sense. You could ration. Now, when you take this approach, suddenly you have to turn on your seichel, which is not easy for all religious people, right? Because often in religion, you are told, and sometimes there's even the education as such, that you have to shut down common sense. Judaism, or at least rational Judaism is, turn on your common sense and start thinking. Think. Now, there are things you're not going to understand, and you're going to do them anyway. Now, that is actually rational, by the way, too, because we believe that Judaism survives because we have an understanding that there are things that we're not going to comprehend. But there is a role. We do believe that there is purpose in thinking. Okay, so when it comes to the culture, right, when it comes to, we talk about social order, or Western civilization, there is something that we should take into consideration. In other words, we should develop an appreciation of philosophy. We should develop an appreciation of rational thinking. And just as in Judaism, we always say that when there are things you enjoy, right? The perfect example is the glass of wine. There are many things I do enjoy, but there's something about a good glass of wine. I do enjoy it. Obviously, even though I'm supposed to be a spiritual person, my tradition tells me, enjoy it, but enjoy it for the sake of heaven. Meaning you drink that cup of coffee, right? It is part of your spiritual service because you are appreciating what God Almighty made in this world. That is what Judaism tells us regarding physical pleasures, right? We call it, obviously, the perfect word to describe this idea that Judaism is not telling you to detach from the world. Your spiritual experience is not to separate you from the world, but rather your Jewish experience is to enjoy the world and elevate it by recognizing that's from Hashem, Kiddush. Kiddush is that experience. In other words, you enter into Shabbat, the day of spirituality, the day of recognizing what everything's about. 6 days we run, right? 6 days we're a chicken without a head, right? That's how we were always just something, time flies, and from what my understanding is that the older you get, time moves even faster. That's what my mother says. So things just move it. They just move. And then come Shabbos, you sit down. What is this day about? Reminding us what we are about and what existence is about. Existence is about sanctifying the world. Enjoy it, right? Have good Shabbos food, make Kiddush on good wine. That is what it is all about. So now, just as it applies to pleasure, it applies to rational thinking as well. Think through things. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Right? My rabbi tells me to do something that sounds absurd. Do I listen to him? If my religion is based on shutting down common sense, I'm a heretic for even asking that question. Like, how do you question the Rebbe? Like, don't you have faith of scholars, right? Aren't you supposed to view them as godlike? That's if you take the approach of the shut. If on the other hand, you believe that you know what you're supposed to think, you're supposed to ask, you're supposed to challenge. There are times that you are indeed not going to understand why, but you'll do it anyway, right? Because the rabbi is going to show you in tradition and in text and prove his point. But you have every right to question and challenge. Have your seichel, right? Have your common sense activated. Don't deactivate it. You have on your phones and on your computers the ability to deactivate the beep or not to activate it. Right here, people sometimes in shul struggle with the phone and the beeping, and so they go to their grandchildren and they assist them in getting the beeper off and all that. It's fine. I don't mind. But the point is that you have to activate common sense. That's what Judaism teaches. And a significant portion of problems that exist in religious communities are that people do not activate it. If you have, Yvonne just came back from Israel, right? Were you in Yerushalayim at all? You get stuck in traffic at all?
Yeah.
You did? Wow.
Everywhere you went.
Everywhere. Why did you get struck in traffic? Because people are protesting, I understand, or nothing to do with that?
No. I didn't drive into Yerushalayim.
You didn't drive in. Okay. So there are protests in Yerushalayim. Why are they protesting? Because of the army. The army. So people. So you could see this on the internet. These are very agitating images. Very, very agitating images. And I'm not here to judge. I don't feel qualified. I don't feel it's right to stand outside of Israel and have an opinion on what's happening in Israel. Because I believe that people who live in Israel have a merit that I don't. That's what my religion teaches me. But I nevertheless could share with you a feeling that I'm very, very agitated when I see a bunch of people in a bus and they have to start walking because people are protesting in a very destructive way, right? So what's wrong with education, you ask yourself? How did such a thing happen? Well, in my opinion, part of the issue is that it is part of a system where common sense is shut down. The Rebbe says something, you do it. I don't believe in that. I believe and again, we're not talking only about 14-year-olds. You see people that are a little bit older that are doing it. It is a culture where common sense is shut down. Just to share with you the importance of this idea, I would like to, in Israel, rent a space, advertising space on buses, to share the following statement. And it's a statement from a rabbi who lived 200 years ago. His name was Rabbi Chaim from Volozhin. And Volozhin is a very significant name for anyone that knows the history of the yeshiva world, because he's considered the father of the first modern-day yeshiva, the Volozhin yeshiva, in existence from 1803 to 1892. Now, yeshivot always existed. There was something unique about Volozhin, that it would welcome students from distant locations, and it had a structure for them to stay there, even if they were not local. Historically, yeshivot were more local. This was a grand yeshiva, the Volozhin yeshiva, and it's really the father of modern-day yeshiva. So, Reb Chaim from Volozhin writes, and he tells us, and I'll read it in Hebrew, Asur lo letalmid, it is prohibited for a talmid, for a disciple, lekabel divrei rabot, to accept the words of his teacher, kesheyeshlo, when the disciple, when the student has kushiyot, questions aleihem. When the disciple has questions on what the master says, he should not accept it. He should challenge him. Don't just accept, don't shut off common sense, he writes. And this was really the roots of the Lithuanian yeshivot, where there was a lot of thought, right? There was a lot of discussion. It had its own challenges, obviously, but those were the roots. So I have a desire. So I have a desire to go ahead and put that on buses in Israel. In other words, where the 14-year-old yeshiva student, right, is told by his teacher to do something, and several of them probably in their stomach have a feeling that, this is simply not right, that I'm preventing people, I'm harming people, I'm causing destruction to society because of some kind of political issue. If some of them feel unright, but what do they say to themselves? I can't question my teachers. So I would like to have this statement that, think. That's what Judaism is about. Just as when it comes to the physical world and the pleasures in the world, Judaism wants you to enjoy them. So too, when it comes to common sense that was given to you, God Almighty wants you to use it. Okay, yes?
How does that tie in with Hasidus?
Okay, so your question is more, how does Hasidus tie in with that, right? In other words, now, obviously, there is a different philosophy there and a different approach there. And it has to be, I often would share with you the many magnificent contributions that Hasidic thought has made. At the same time, I'm comfortable with a different track of Judaism. I'm more comfortable with this approach, that you don't just accept if the Rebbe says something. And for me personally, in other words, by some, due to the fact that the Rebbe is the son of a Rebbe, who's the son of a Rebbe, there's something holy about him. For me, if he is a real significant person who really is committed and using his platform for good things, which many of them do, I'm inspired by him. But it's not so much the fact who his Zaidi was, but what he is doing with his time. Hasidic approach sees holiness in things. And just as you will see on a bulletin board, that there's a bus going to Buffalo, right, on Wednesday, for the yahrzeit of some Rebbe that is buried there.
Yeah.
Right? You're going?
I think I got a phone call about it.
You even got a phone call about it, right? I would tell you, right, listen, if you want to go to Buffalo, you could go to Tops. You'll get a good sandwich there. And if you want to go ahead and pray, prayer is okay. But to believe that you have something that you could achieve there in prayer that you don't achieve in other places, I'm not at this point, at this stage of my life, I'm not a big believer of that. I believe in prayer, but I believe you could do it right here. And the same God who is there is. But if from Hasidic thought there's something about sanctity, obviously it's a different track. I take my approach, but the question is obviously a very, very good one. You need to question. Now, so when it comes, if indeed Avraham now is interacting with Greek culture, as we have introduced Rabbi Milevsky here, and Greek culture leads us to Western civilization and Western philosophy. Western philosophy is really about beauty, right? Greek culture, Greek philosophy. It's about beauty. It's about aesthetics. It's about the architecture. And when they talk about social order, it is not that they're trying to satisfy some higher authority. It's because it is more pleasant to live in a society where there is such order, right? It's what is visible that is considered good. Now, if you remember, I'm just going to introduce you to a word which you've heard a few times. If you remember Balak. Remember Balak? Remember Bilam? And you remember his visions? In his visions, he looks at the people of Israel. I'm going to quote from a verse. And he says that I see the Jews from their origins. Merosh Suri Mereno. So this is Prophet Bilam talking about the people of Israel. That I see them from their origins. Umigvaot, and from hills, Ashureno. Umigvaot, and from hills, Ashureno. And from these hills, I can see them. Shur is vision, is seeing. If you remember Bnot, it says about Yosef, Bnot Sadu Alei Shur. In other words, it could be according to some it's a wall, but other is Shur is vision. If I want to find a word to describe a culture that only focuses on beauty, external beauty, and nothing that is deeper than that, I would I would identify the word Shur. Okay? Now, on the other hand, Judaism, just as when it comes to wine, you use it for a higher purpose, that is Kiddush, so too when it comes to thought, when it comes to common sense, use your common sense. It is very, very good to use your brain and to be rational, but use it for the sake of heaven, and that is Kadosh. So you see the idea between, he's interacting here with the society. Now, Abraham up until now is interacting with corrupt society like Sdom. Here, in this region, he has to show them the contrast. Here where he is interacting with those that have some kind of values. His goal is to show them that there is a significant difference. He wants to present to them the contrast between things that are just sure and kadosh. Okay, now, going back, turn to page 90, and let's read again. What is this region where he settles there? Vayisa Misham Avraham. He moves, and he is facing a new challenge, right? So where does he settle? Ben Kadesh uben Shur. So this symbolizes this idea that he is positioning himself where he has to show them the contrast between things that are, between the idea of holiness, using the physical world, which includes Haseichel that was given by God, and on the other hand, the focus only on that which is external. That is what is really presented here. You know, it's important to remember that when values are only based on common sense, when you don't believe that there's a Yirat Elokim, there's a slippery slope. And if you think about, there's a lot of in the news over the past few weeks, since we're very proud of our Yiddish nation, but we're not so proud of Harvey Weinstein, right? It's not exactly a very Yiddish name, right? Obviously, it could be a member in any shul, and I'm sure there are others that Nebach have. It's a common name, I would believe. A Weinsteins, or many Weinsteins, and Harvey. How can you not name a Jewish child Harvey? But his behavior seems to be problematic, right? And at the same time, you read about the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, who appears to be is a very solid individual. So he has guidelines that, for example, he would not sit down for a dinner with a woman that's not his wife. And of course, liberal press thinks that that's absurd. But what I would say is, shouldn't these stories of weakness in the sexual area teach you the importance of having boundaries, right? Religious boundaries. Shouldn't they be inspired by it? That if you only rely on social norms, right? So where is it going to stop, right? Where is it going to stop? In other words, if the interaction, if this is okay and that's okay, right? And the following interaction is okay, it could lead you to some very problematic behavior. You have to have boundaries, because otherwise there's going to be that slippery slope. When you say something that things in Israel, in modern Hebrew, I think, when you say that one thing led to another, hadavar garar davar acher, right? Ligror, give me a better translation for ligror. Well, there's a cause and effect, but things like it's like a slippery slope that it got pulled in a direction, right? Hadavar garar davar acher, and that's an important lesson. If you do not have the fear of God in the picture, you're going to live in a society of that slippery slope, that gerar, that obviously is also referred to that in verse number 1 of chapter 20. He settles and he tries to teach everyone the difference between Kadesh and Shur, but he tries to teach them as well the message of boundaries, of gerar. Now, you mentioned about Hasidic thought. For example, in Hasidic circles, they believe in the concept of sanctity. So many of them, let's say they're traveling and they want to protect themselves, so they'll take a sefer with them. Take a sefer, and they believe that if they have the works, for example, of a holy person, like the Noam Elimelech, right? The Noam Elimelech, one of the great, you come from Hasidic roots, it's a very significant tzaddik, a righteous person. So they follow the approach that if they have it in their bag, they feel protected. And many people have a custom, even my father, believe it or not, that they would write on a piece of paper the name of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. He was a great Hasidic master. And if you write on a piece of paper Levi Yitzchak ben Sarasasha, and you have it in your passport, so even if you're going into a country, you could even visit Iran with it. Right? I don't know about that. But the point is that there's this idea of being protected, that if you have a name of someone righteous, you're not going to lose your luggage if you have the Noam Elimelech there. There's a concept that does exist, and obviously these thoughts, societies are, even, I can tell you my other quote-unquote rational grandfather, there was a book called Raziel Hamalach, some old Kabbalistic text that he would always carry with him. So this idea did have an impact even in the more rational societies. But the old story is that when the Lithuanian, meaning the fellow who is all rational, sits down next to the Hasidic guy on a plane, and he says to him, "Can I borrow your sefer? I want to be protected by studying from it." In other words, the rational individual believes that if I study from it and learn a lesson and learn some Torah, that is what protects me, not just having it. So obviously, there are significant differences and different paths that we find within our Judaism. But what we do have is the difference between Kadesh and Shur. Do we buy, not Shur, Kadesh and Shur, right? You get the idea. That you have to sanctify things and you have to know that, use the world. However, you have to be careful with this as well. Meaning, it is not being sure, right, and just hoping for God. It's interesting that Islam the religion of Islam. What does Islam really mean? They say that it means submission to God. Right? That's what a lot is discussed about Islam. At Shabbos, I had the opportunity of talking about a disturbing article that I read in the Toronto Star. I don't read the Toronto Star, let me make it clear. So that's number one. And unfortunately, there was this article that was sent, and it had to do with Imam somewhere downtown, that in one of his drushes talked about slaying them one by one and to purify Jerusalem from the filth of the Jews. So these are not pleasant things to hear. And eventually a video got out, right? The video got out. So that is what is being filmed, that we know what is said in these mosques. He also had a position in Ryerson as some kind of assistant professor, so he lost his position because there are very good Jewish organizations here in town that monitor these things throughout Canada, actually. And the Toronto Star's article was basically that when someone says, slay them one by one and the filth of the Jews, they don't really mean it. And they spoke to 5 experts of Islam, and all 5 experts said that you have to really understand what they mean. This is what the article was about. So we Jews, and the article is basically how harsh we are, the Jewish community, on someone when we don't really understand what they mean, right? So this, yeah.
Yeah, this fellow, this imam, wrote a letter into the Star today, and he said how he apologizes, but he was misunderstood.
Misunderstood. So when he said filth of the Jews, he meant something else.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very, very interesting.
What he really meant.
Anyway.
What he said.
So there's a lot of discussion of what does Islam really preach. The truth is, I do believe that you can't really understand the religion from the outside. I mean, and it's hard for us. It's hard for us to truly understand it. You have to judge them by actions. You have to judge the religion by their actions. And so again, we're not my field of expertise, but what I do know is that they say over and over that Islam is a religion of submission to God. And in Judaism, we talk about, when I use the word kadosh, holiness, using common sense, I think that too is an important tool to combat people that just hope for God. In other words, we don't live a religious life by just praying to God and by just hoping to God and just being mikaveh el Hashem and just having hope. That's not what a religious life is. You do your part, right? You live in a world, you act in this world, you go to the workplace, there's a medical issue, you go to a doctor, you are involved in the physical world, you recognize that there is a God and you turn to Him for assistance, but you do your part with what was given to you as a rational human being, as a rational person. This is what we believed. It's what we believed then and what we believe now. So when I would look at Yishmael, who has been linked throughout our tradition to Muslims, by them, the contrast would not be, the way I see it, between Kadesh and Shur, but it would be more something between, in other words, obviously they are contrasting, they are against the Shur philosophy, but they would use the word something like hope. Remember, like during Yom Kippur services, Ochilo Lakel, I shall hope to God, Akaveh El Hashem, Ochila, right? The word comes from the word Tikva. Vayichal Moshe, it's Ochila, Vayichal, praying to God, turning to God in submission would be their key word. So what for us is presented here, and the dwelling place of Avraham, where he's trying to show them the contrast between Kadesh and Shur, for Yishmael, I would view the version of such a presentation would be that he's trying to show them the difference between, like in Ochila and Shur. Now, by the way, just look at the end of Parashat Vayeira. So if you turn right now to page 122, verse 18, and this is talking about Ishmael, which we're going to have more of an opportunity to address what he is about and the essence of someone that indeed turns in prayer. His name indicates that. Yishma, that God listens to prayer, because there's no question prayer plays a role. but it is a complete submission where you just hope to God and you don't do the Kadesh, you don't utilize the physical world the way you should. So where does he settle? So at the last verse of Parashat Vayeira, where we are told that there are descendants of Ishmael, Vayishkenu, where do they settle? Mechavila, from a place called Chavila ad Shur. And there are commentators that say that Chavila comes from the word Ochila. Chavila, Ochil, Vayichal. That is what symbolizes them. It is not between Kadesh, where you use the physical world, but rather it is Chavila, Ochila, where they just turn to God. God will take care of it. Obviously, that could lead you sometimes to do some very irrational things, because when you hear from a preacher, from a teacher, to do something that is against natural law, something you know you shouldn't be doing, you put that aside because those feelings have no place. I should just be following what my tradition teaches us. The ochila could be very, very dangerous. Judaism wants a kadesh. Use the physical world, appreciate it. Use your common sense as well. And if we use our common sense and at the same time recognize there are things we're not going to understand, but at least we could go ahead and have the proper impact and learn from Abraham. I do thank you all for listening, and everyone have a wonderful day.